Hello, Realtor family. So glad y'all are joining us today. If we've not met before, my name is Mark Saunders. I am a Realtor out of Winston-Salem, North Carolina. Also, I teach CE, continuing education, technology all across North Carolina. So hopefully we've met before. I put a thing in the chat just a minute ago, and I'm already seeing some messages coming back. The chat is disabled, but the Q&A button does work. So I would love it if you can. What city are you located in? I'm kind of curious. These webinars are awesome. We get to see realtors from all over the state. Go to Q&A, type in your answer, what city that you're in today. Would love to hear your questions throughout today about e-closings. That's what we're going to be talking about. Give you a full update on where North Carolina is at in terms of e-closings. I've been saying in a lot of my technology classes for the past few months that for the next 12 to 24 months, we're probably going to see more change in the real estate industry than we've maybe seen in 5 to 10 years. And giving the big news that came out last week with the lawsuits and everything, I think we're already starting to see some major change. The reason I think we're going to see a lot of change is one, the lawsuits, two, technology like e-closings, which what we're going to talk about today, and also AI, artificial intelligence, is kind of changing everything. And with great change comes great opportunity. And I definitely think e-closings are going to be the way of the future. And realtors that understand it and can offer this to their clients are going to be in a really, really good position. So with that, to start off our webinar today, this year's NCAR president, Tony Harrington, was hopefully going to make it to this webinar today. But as you can guess, with everything going on, he's got a full plate. So he sent us a video I'd like to share with you to kind of kick off our webinar. And then I'm going to introduce our special guest that I've got for y'all here in just a little bit. So here we go. Here is Tony.
Hey everybody, it's good to see everybody today, and thank you so much for being a part of this class talking about e-mortgages and e-closings. I have to say, just not only a year or so ago, I didn't really know much about this program, and so I have eagerly learned a lot about this in the past year, and so I'm excited that we are bringing this to you today, and I hope that you'll enjoy a lot from the course. I want to thank Mark for his leadership in training these courses across our state. And it's because of his leadership that I'm thankful that I'm actually this year going to be working on the Secretary of State's committee on e-closings. And so I'm looking forward to all the information that we're going to try to bring to our members across the state and integrate some changes possibly so that we could better educate our members and better educate our public and consumers and clients about all the different things that they can be a part of when it comes to the ease of transactions moving forward. So with that, I'm excited to be here with you today, and I hope that we have a great class, and let's just enjoy the great day. So Mark, I'm handing it off to you.
Awesome. Thanks for the video that he sent in to us. And here's my history a little bit with e-closings. So if you might have been to one of my e-closing classes, I've been teaching CE across North Carolina. I actually was one of the first to do what at that time was called a RON, Remote Online Notary Closing. We did it here in the big town of King, North Carolina. I always say King's the city that never sleeps now because we got a Sheetz and a Walmart. So we're just north of Winston-Salem, and our local news picked it up. Here's a picture of me and my wife closing on our house that I'm currently doing the Zoom webinar from. We did everything electronic, totally different way of closing. It's changed a little bit, and we're going to get you up to date on what has changed and where we're at the state level of rolling this out across North Carolina. But yeah, this was it. So you can see on my video, on the screen here, Ozzy Stallworth, who is actually our special guest today. He's going to give you an update on where everything's at from the Secretary of State's office. My lender was on the screen. My attorney was on the screen. The notary was on there. We did everything electronic. Once we were done, it was then sent off to the closing attorney, who then answered it, who got it electronically recorded, and then we were on record. It took about 30 to 45 minutes total time to do our closing. No going to the attorney's office. totally a different thing. So I am sure you have questions about where the eClosings at. If you came to one of my early CE courses, you're probably like, why are we not seeing it more? Ask your questions. I'm keeping an eye on the question and answer box, the Q&A. Ask your questions. We're going to go back towards the end of this webinar and answer as many questions as we possibly can. Thank you so much for putting your city in. It looks like we have the whole state covered, from it looks like the Outer Banks all the way to Hickory and Boone. So thank you all so much for coming in today. This is the future, and it's very exciting. So with that, I want to introduce our guest today, who is directly from the North Carolina Secretary of State. This is Ozzie Stallworth. He has been overseeing the whole e-closing, e-notary process from the very beginning. This is directly from the source. If there's anything e-closing related, Ozzie's going to know about it. So Ozzie, thank you so much for joining us today.
Mark, thank you so very much for having me. And hello to all of the realtors and brokers out there. We certainly appreciate having an opportunity to share some updates with you. Do want to just thank Mark for his yeoman's-like work in terms of carrying the message to realtors across the state over the last couple of years. We do firmly believe that you all are the key to the success of electronic mortgage closing and it being adopted, because you all are the ones that are closest to the consumer, who, from our perspective, this is really all about how can we better serve the consumers. And so, and we have their best interest in mind, as we know you do as well. And so we do view your community as the most critical part in this process. And of course, the other stakeholder groups that are involved are the attorneys that you work with, the lenders that you work with. And so it's going to take everybody to kind of pull on the same end of the rope to make this thing really take off and work. And take off is something that we've done, a number of years ago, as Mark indicated that, he was the very first one to do a fully electronic remote closing. So he's going to go down in the annals of history in North Carolina. But that's just the beginning. We want this to be an option for everybody. We do recognize that it is not going to, be for every closing, for every situation, but we view this as another tool in the toolbox. And so there is a lot of work that's being done that I'm going to kind of get around to sharing with you concerning specifically the new law that was passed that is going to be a permanent law that will allow for fully electronic mortgage closings to take place. But I want to make sure that I bring everybody up to speed with where we are. And I wanted to start way back in 2005, because the process of electronic notarization, which allows for electronic closings, it's not new. We've been working on this for a really long time. And this remote business, it came about based on, the pandemic that we all kind of lived through and made it through, thank God. So taking you back to the very beginning, we developed our electronic notarization program with a view towards being able to have a fully electronic mortgage closing process, to eliminate the paper, to speed the transactions, to add additional layers of security in the transaction so that folks would be able to close on the properties faster, get the proceeds transferred faster, get paid faster, have the keys delivered faster, all in a secure fashion. And here's the great news. The great news is this. This is being done every day today. We're not talking about waiting around for the full electronic mortgage closing to take place, because again, the electronic notary piece, which is the central element of all of this, it's been around and it's been perfected at this point, since way back when. Mark showed you an image of the first remote closing, but I think we go way back to 20. I'm about to call a year, and I might get this year wrong, so forgive me. But it's been about 8 years now, I think, 7 or 8 years now since we did the first electronic mortgage closing with North State Bank. So this is not a new process, and it is something that provides every bit of convenience, security, efficiency that the remote electronic process affords. The only difference between what can be done today and is being done today is that with the remote processes, it just really opens up the ability for folks to be, anywhere in North Carolina, or in fact, anywhere in the country when the electronic mortgage is executed. All right. So that's the additional benefit that we are building in to the toolbox with the remote electronic notarization process. So be really interested in seeing where you guys are as it relates to, the use of electronic signatures. And I know the Realtors were the first to really adopt that process many years ago. But then, electronic mortgage closings as it's happening today. And in fact, let me share a couple of things with you too that you'll be interested in. And, some Realtors feel like this is a really great benefit, and others, might shy away from it a little bit. But the reality is that you all do have a special provision in the notary law that will allow you to notarize your own customers' signatures on the documents related to anything, including the closing. The general rule there for notaries is that, if you have some financial or beneficial interest in a transaction, then you're disqualified from performing that notarization. But according to notary law that's found in 10B20 C6, subsection C6, there are a number of entities or individuals that have an exemption to that particular general rule. And realtors are among those. There are attorneys, there are realtors, there are bankers, and there are automobile dealers. And so a realtor has the ability, even though you're likely going to receive a commission or some financial benefit from the transaction, the law carves out an exception for you. So just wanted to share that with you in the event that
I'm glad you shared that, because whenever I teach the class and I mention that, some realtors are notaries and they're just like, no, no, no. And I'm like, okay, this is straight from the source. But do you think most attorneys would have an e-notary? Because like right now, most attorneys will have a notary on staff. Do you think that attorney would possibly have an e-notary there? Or how do you see that kind of working? Do you have any ideas?
Well, the numbers for e-notaries are growing. Let me give you an idea of what the total numbers of notaries are. In the state of North Carolina, we have approximately 170,000 traditional notaries currently. Now, of that number of notaries, we have approximately about 7,000 e-notaries, okay, which is a small percentage of the overall number. But that 7,000 number is pretty significant, considering the fact that 2 years ago we had just over 2,000 e-notaries. And so we can see that those numbers of electronic notaries are continuing to grow. We're on a real steep trajectory in terms of the numbers that we're seeing. And that is largely due to the idea that more and more entities are moving. They're finally catching up with you all from the standpoint of saying, okay, well, these electronic signature tools, hey, we can use those too. They are viable. And so they're adding the electronic notarization services. But of course, one of the primary things that's driving this is the whole concept of the electronic mortgage closing itself. And so more and more attorneys, law firms see the future, and they're getting engaged and prepared to be able to provide electronic notary services to their customers, not just as it relates to real estate, but in the other transactions that they're involved with as well. In fact, we have convened several years ago the Electronic Mortgage Closing Advisory Committee. And on that committee this year, we have any number of attorneys who are really helping to prepare information and training sessions for attorneys about, how to move forward with electronic processes, including electronic signatures, electronic notarization, and electronic closing. So that's a contributing factor for the number of e-notaries that continues to climb. But then also, we'll talk a little bit later on about the remote electronic notarization law that everybody's kind of waiting to see when that's going to come online. And that is also fueling those numbers. And I'll share with you, I've been with the Secretary of State's office since about 2005 when we started our whole program. But the thing that I wanted to share with you, and the reason I started out talking about electronic notarization and the fact that that is something that is available today, is because it's important to understand, from my perspective, that most folks kind of walk or crawl before they walk and walk before they run. And so I spend a lot of time encouraging folks that are anticipating and looking forward to the remote electronic notarization process to, be aware and mindful of and grab hold of the electronic notarization process, so that when the remote electronic notarization, and we refer to that as REN, R-E-N. So when you hear me say REN from now on, I'll be able to get more words in if I shorten that phrase. When you're looking forward to REN, when it finally gets here, it'll be an easier transition. And not only for the practitioners, that's the realtor, the attorney, or the lender, but also for the consumer as well. It's easier for them to go from a paper process to an electronic process than it is for them to go from a paper process to not only an electronic, but the completely remote process. And so, you'll hear me continue to pepper in, information about just where we are today and the use of electronic signatures, electronic notarization, and electronic recording as well. But the remote electronic notarization law has been passed. It is going to be a permanent law that is going to forever allow remote electronic notarization to take place. Now, let me talk a little bit more about the tool that is also currently available that Mark actually participated in with the first closing. He did that closing under the current electronic or emergency video notarization law. And we refer to that as the EVN, emergency video notarization law. And so that is a temporary law. It is currently set to expire on June 30th of 2024. It has been extended on a number of occasions, at least a couple times, and we are anticipating that we're going to have it extended at least one more time. And the reason for that is because we're still working through getting all of the rules that are needful for the remote electronic notarization law to be approved and then adopted by the Secretary of State's office and by the Rules Review Committee. And so that emergency video notarization law, it is in place today, and it essentially allows for a full electronic remote closing, as Mark did, now going on almost 2 years ago.
Yeah, that's good. You actually answered. Rebecca asked that question. If REN isn't currently allowed, how was I allowed to do one? I did it under that special exemption. Now, let's touch on that real quick, because REN and RON is different. If it's that special exemption, I think the main takeaway, and correct me if I'm wrong, under my situation, the buyers had to be in North Carolina, correct? And
that is correct.
Yes. So I was in Winston-Salem. I was in King. My attorney was in Matthews. The lender was in Charlotte. Under the new law, RON, that is rolling out, you do not have to be in North Carolina. Can you touch on that just a little bit?
Absolutely. So as Mark mentioned, the temporary law, the emergency video notarization law, it allows the notary or electronic notary, because both entities are authorized to perform remote notarizations under the EVN. Okay. All parties, however, under that temporary law are required to be in North Carolina. Now, they can be in different parts of the state, but all parties must be in North Carolina. With the remote electronic notarization law, the notary will need to be in North Carolina, but the other party can literally be anywhere in the United States. Okay, they can be in any state in the United States. They can be on a military base or U.S. territory, or if they're in a consulate or embassy in some other country, they're eligible as well. So that's one of the primary differences between the temporary EVN and the more permanent remote electronic notarization law, REN. The other significant difference is that whereas traditional notaries can perform an EVN notarial act where the parties are remote, when REN comes effective, only electronic notaries are going to have the ability to perform the remote electronic notarization. And let me also share with you a little bit of a distinction, because many of you have heard the term RON, R-O-N, that stands for remote online notarization. There are about 40 to 48 states, I think, that have passed a law that will allow for remote notarial acts. And most of them have passed what is called a remote online notarization, hence RON, RON. North Carolina's is a little bit different, and ours is a remote electronic notarization, REN. And it's not just semantics, because what I just described to you all in terms of the EVN in both traditional notaries as well as electronic notaries under the EVN being able to perform remote notarial acts, with our REN, only electronic notaries are going to be able to do that. But most states' RON laws also allow traditional notaries to perform remote notarial acts. And so we are going to do away with that. And the primary reason is because you really don't have the same levels of security and integrity related to the documents when you are, notarizing a paper document remotely. Now, the EVN stands for emergency video notarization. So you might ask, well, why are we able to do that under, the EVN? Well, we were in somewhat of an emergency, and we had to kind of allow the commerce to continue to flow during the pandemic stage where everybody was quarantined and that kind of thing. But as we sought to develop a permanent law, we thought it was going to be in the best interest of everybody to make sure that these remote processes were solely linked to the electronic process. That way we could really continue to ensure the integrity of the transactions in the documents that were being executed and limit, the potential for fraud. And so that's the primary difference between what you hear in terms of RON and REN. But the overall concept is the same, where we're able to perform notarial acts remotely and on a permanent basis.
Okay. Awesome. Just a reminder, I see some people still coming in and joining us. The chat box is disabled. If you have questions, drop them into Q&A. I'm watching them. I think we've answered all the questions that's come up, so I appreciate that. So the main thing, the new law, once it's really rolled out, you could have an investor in Ohio buying their Outer Banks second home, and they could do the closing while they're in Ohio through the electronic process and everything. So
absolutely.
Just how that could affect that. It could be a really good thing. You mentioned security and integrity in a little bit. When we teach CE, and I teach this course across North Carolina, and everybody, if you want to do a deep dive into this, check with your local association if they're offering our 4-hour CE course that we worked all together with the Secretary of State, NC Realtors to develop to really go deep into this. But let's talk a little bit about security, if you don't mind. Everybody's always kind of scared doing everything online. I'm not a big fan at all of our current setup when we're mailing documents to another state and we have no clue who the notary is there. I like the idea of at least having a North Carolina notary that y'all can contact and track very easy. Touch on that. Touch on the security aspect of this compared to what a paper closing looks like.
Well, that's a really great point, Mark. And it's one of the things that we like to talk about because, we have to appreciate the concern that everybody has for security in the age that we are in. You're developing a course on AI and how that's going to work and move in different areas. And so there's good sides to that and there's scary sides to that. Whenever you're talking about online transactions, how do we know who the person is? Well, we're spending a lot of time developing rules and trying to make sure we understand what the current standards are, what they should be. And we may be in a situation to where we're going to have to push federal entities to develop standards for safety, integrity, and security in the way of establishing the identity of individuals who are transacting these remote processes. So it's a great place to always start where folks have questions and are legitimately concerned about, well, how safe is this? Well, when you compare apples to apples and you talk about the paper process versus our electronic processes, and not all electronic processes, but I'm going to boast a little bit on North Carolina's electronic processes as it relates to electronic signatures, electronic notarization, electronic recording, all the things that are associated with electronic mortgage closings. Well, in the paper process, now it's a process that's worked for hundreds of years and we trust it, right? But when you start to really analyze it, it's pretty much void of security all up and down the chain, when you consider, and I'll start with just the color copiers, right? Everybody has a color copier and those things can produce documents that, really look legitimate. They're great, crisp copies. You couldn't tell the original from the copy, right? You remember that commercial? Is it real or is it Memorex? Really tough to do. But we're so, technologically speaking, so much beyond just a good color copier. Now, there are all sorts of tools that everybody has access to, Photoshop and things of that nature, and things that, are just as effective but don't cost nearly as much, where you can upload documents and manipulate them and create signatures and make all sorts of changes and things like that, print that document out and present it to whomever, the register of deeds, what have you. And how do you really know who signed it and actually who notarized it? This isn't something that I'm pleased to say, although I will share that I'm pleased to announce we have a little bit of a remedy for this. But prior to some of these new laws that had just been passed and rules that we're writing, almost anybody could get a hold of a North Carolina notary seal, right? Because we didn't have any provisions to prevent that. Well, now we do. Now we have some pretty stringent laws that say that, a person who's going to manufacture a notary seal will need to have proof that this person is a notary, and they're going to have to verify that through the Secretary of State's office. So we just strengthen, that, exponentially. Now, the bad guys are still going to be the bad guys, but we've got some tools in place now to kind of help along those lines. But the question has been, how do you really know that it's really a notary? It could be somebody who just created a stamp, right? How do we know that the person whose signature is on there really did it? Well, when you ask that question, the answer is, well, we really don't. We trust it and have for hundreds of years. Now, when you compare that to the processes and related to, say, electronic notarization, electronic signatures, we have tools in place to verify that the notary is actually a notary. How do you do that? Well, when you just look at the authentication process, in order for a notary to become a notary, they have to attend a course of instruction, which I'm sure some of you have done. They're positively identified at that level. Then they have to complete a notary application where a notary is going to positively identify them. And then they're going to need to appear before the Register of Deeds office to be sworn in, where they're going to be positively identified again by the Register of Deeds. And then to become an e-notary so you can perform electronic notarizations, all of those things have to kind of happen again. And then here's where the technology really comes into play. The electronic notary solution provider, before they provide an electronic notary signature and seal to that e-notary, they have to obtain a certificate from the Register of Deeds that is going to be provided to the e-notary upon taking their oath. And then they're going to present that certificate to the solution provider. The solution provider then pings the Secretary of State system to verify that this person is actually authorized to perform electronic notarizations. And then only at that point are they going to produce the electronic notary signature and seal to that e-notary. And then it goes a little bit further, because once the notary affixes his or her signature and seal on this particular document, and they're the only ones who are going to be able to do that because it's protected by passwords and other authentication protocols, the solution is going to ping the system of the Secretary of State's office to verify that this person still has an active status. And once the signature and the seal on that document has been affixed, the document now becomes tamper evident, meaning that if there are any changes on the document at all, that document's going to reflect that there has been a change, both on the electronic version and if it's printed out. There'll be a statement on there that says something to the effect that this document has been altered or changed. Okay. Now, if there is a question as to, well, how do I know that Mark Saunders actually signed this document? Every one of those transactions comes with a complete audit trail that is easily accessible by the administrator, where with each document that's executed, there's a complete list of who created the document, when the document was created, who opened it, who viewed it, who signed it. The signatures are captured. All of that metadata is captured. The IP address where the person actually would, sign the document, all of that's captured. So I'll stop there, and then I'll say, well, let's go back and compare the paper process with this electronic process. Which would you say is much more secure?
And on top of that, the closing is recorded as well. So I've always said in some of our classes, real estate brokers would probably explain the working with real estate agent pamphlet if the whole thing was recorded and there was a video record of it. So, but that's kind of the process for the electronic closings, recording, and that has to stay with the mortgage note and everything. So thanks for going deep into that. I just don't think there's a comparison between the two with all the things that you mentioned. I've got some really good questions. You okay if I ask you a couple questions that are coming up on the screen here?
Absolutely. Hopefully I can answer most of them.
Yeah. And then we can kind of talk a little bit about the law and everything. So Rebecca mentioned, I may have missed it, but what is the timing for having the REN passed and available? We can do electronic closings now. Why don't you kind of give us an update on where we're at? Because the law went into effect July of last year, correct? And now we're working out the rules. So kind of tell us where are we at in the process?
Okay. The law has been passed. Okay, so let's get that on the table. Now, one of the things that the law required the Secretary of State's office to do was to develop rules related to, making the law effective. So we had a number of things that we needed to contend with, and I'll try to break those down for everybody. Now, on top of the new rules that we needed to create, we had an existing set of rules for our Notary Act. Then we also had an existing set of rules for the Electronic Notary Act. And now we're required to create a set of rules for remote electronic notarization. And then on top of that, we have a statutory requirement for every 10 years to review and update all of the rules that the agency is responsible for. Okay, so all of that was on our plate and currently is still on our plate. So the first thing that we had to do was to figure out, well, how are we going to approach this? Well, one bite at a time. So we broke it down and we said that this is going to require, it's so significant that we're going to break this up into 3 different phases. And the first thing that we had to do is to look to see what needed to happen to harmonize all of those rules across traditional notary, electronic notary, and now remote notary. Because in North Carolina, we only have one commission. We have a notary commission, and then you register your capabilities to perform electronic notarization. And we've determined, with the passage of this new law, is that we would not have yet another registration for remote notarization, but that all e-notaries would have the ability to perform remote electronic notarizations. And so the first thing we need to do was to harmonize all of the laws so that they all work together seamlessly. And then we focused on breaking the laws up into 3 different phases. Now, the first phase of the rules, they have been written, they have been adopted and approved, which is great. Now, what those rules essentially focused on was general notary requirements, the electronic notary requirements, and the journal requirements. Okay, so most of those rules have been adopted and are already effective. But none of those dealt specifically with remote electronic notarization. Now, we're also pleased to share with you that the second phase of the rules have been adopted by the Rules Review Committee and approved by the Secretary of State's office. Now, these rules dealt with the process to become a notary and process to renew notary commissions, continuing obligations of notaries, and notary instructor requirements, including general requirements for the regulated notary community, including any number of definitions and things of that nature. Now, most of those rules, and we went through to look to see when it made sense for these rules to become effective. The idea situation is to have all of the rules become effective at the same time so that, we can roll out the program, at one particular time. But there was some of the rules and new laws that we wanted to become effective sooner rather than later. For example, notaries are now authorized to charge a travel fee for their services. Well, we didn't want to delay that. So, that effective date, is come and gone. We said, we want that to become effective. We want notaries to be able to take advantage of that. But some of the other things that, that have been adopted, they're so closely related to remote electronic notarization. We thought that it really didn't make a whole lot of sense for, this rule or this definition to become effective, because it won't be, usable until the rest of the e-notary or remote electronic notarization specifically, and I'm going to get to the technology aspects of it, until those things become effective. So we're currently in the process of looking to see whether or not we can extend the effective date for a good number of the rules that were in phase number 2 from, a 2024 date to 2025. And so ultimately, and this is the question, this is where everybody, is really trying to get to. Well, when are we going to be able to do this? Well, we are anticipating having all of the rules, all three phases of the rules being effective on March 1st of 2025. That
March
is
1st.
our current goal. Now, let me share with you some of the things that are going to need to happen once all the rules are effective, because it's important to really have, and now we have a better sense of what all this is going to take. And by the way, I'll share this with everybody as well, just so that you know and can appreciate some of what has gone into this. We have spent in excess, as a staff at the Secretary of State's office, in excess of 8,000 hours on rulemaking to this point. No funds have been appropriated to us for this rulemaking effort. Very important, functions of the office have been, kind of pushed to the side, delayed. We try to get to everything, but some things just kind of have had to take a little bit of a back seat. And my good friend Mark can attest to some of this, personally, as he's waited very patiently for any number of things from me. But as an agency, this has taken center stage, and any number of things have kind of had to take a little bit of a backseat, to be placed on the back burner. And so all of this has been done along those lines, with all of the rest of the work that the agency is always tasked with. And so it has been a real challenge. And when I share, in excess of 8,000 hours have been kind of devoted to this by the agency at this point, that includes folks like myself, our Deputy Secretary of State, a couple of our attorneys, including our General Counsel, all of the primary leaders of our IT department. And so it's been a total effort to get us to where we are now. So once all of the rules are finally adopted, then the department, notaries, notary instructors, vendors, and other stakeholders are going to need to work together to build an infrastructure necessary to conduct these remote electronic notarizations. Such infrastructure includes platforms and third-party vendors that must be screened and licensed by the department before contracting their services to electronic notaries. Also, the department must revise the notary manual and the electronic notary manual to incorporate the changes to the law and the rules. Forms are going to need to be developed and prepared so applicants will be able to deliver essential information to the department in terms of their participation in remote electronic notarization, both on the notary end as well as for the vendors or solution providers. All electronic notary training must be updated. Eligible institutions engaged in training provided to the instructors and to the institutions that offer these classes. No North Carolina notary public will be able to perform remote electronic notarizations under the provisions of RENA until the rules implementing RENA have been not only adopted, but then complied with. So I say all of that to say that we're still a ways off from, full implementation of the remote electronic notarization law. One of the things that,
yeah,
well,
go ahead,
let me say this really quickly, Mark, and that is because sometimes, we can, everybody wants this to happen, but one of the things that we're going to ensure that happens is that we get it right the first time. And I'm very proud to be able to say that we have a certifiable history of doing that with electronic signatures, electronic recording, with electronic notarization. We've been very deliberate and diligent to make sure that we take our time and get all the stakeholder involvement that's necessary to come up with processes and tools that are going to work for the best interests of North Carolina. And this is something that is probably even more critical than everything else, because we have the new concept that we're all dealing with of dealing with remote entities. And, in the world that we live in today, in fact, we have just reached out to the Department of Homeland Security as they are doing some research on the area that we most need information on. And that is, how do we trust the solution providers that say, we've got a solution, that's going to help you identify this remotely located individual? Some of you may be familiar with the terms credential analysis and identity proofing. Well, we've been throwing those terms around, pretty good, but what exactly do you get with those, right? And that's where we are now. How do we know that we're going to be able to rely on, the results of these? What is the pass fail rate? What is the acceptable rate of, getting it right versus false negatives or what have you? So these are things that are taking time, but we're committed to making sure we get it right the first time.
Yeah, and thanks for letting us peek behind the curtain a little bit and see what's going on.
And that's way behind the curtain, Mark.
There's a lot of things going. Now, I've said this in class, a lot of things, you got to have an attorney that can do an e-closing, because we're an attorney state. The lender, somebody has asked, are the lenders and title companies approved of us doing this? More and more are getting on board pretty much all the time. There's credit unions, there's lenders, there's title companies. Yes, they are there. And as this catches more steam, I think you're going to see more and more added to it. My kind of take, talking with attorneys, traveling the state, a lot of attorneys are kind of waiting to see where the final rules plays out. They all that are aware of this know it's coming, and they know this is going to be the future. So I will tell you, Realtors, if you're listening to this and you want to see e-closings, after this class, call your attorney that does your closings and ask them and say, hey, where are you at with the e-closing process? Because I can promise you, we're covering the state right now with this webinar. If your favorite attorney gets 4 or 5 or 6 calls from their realtor that sends them their business asking about this, well, guess what? If it wasn't on their radar, it will be now. And they'll start thinking about the processes to put in place for it. But like you said, we can do this. And I know some attorneys that are doing e-closings now, and they're getting way ahead of their competition. Would you agree with that, Ozzy?
Absolutely. And I just wanted to underscore that, Mark. The REN law is one thing, and it's coming, right? Mm-hmm. But there's no reason to wait for that. And so, you can provide a greater value in service to, your customers now through the use of electronic closing. So, in addition to asking whether or not they're, have the remote electronic notarization on their radar, are they equipped to do e-closings today? And there are any number of institutions nationally that are doing this. And that's another thing that, we didn't really touch on, Mark. But the reason that we have been working on this so diligently for so long is to ensure that North Carolinians, had the advantage in this arena, so that we could, be able to compete in what's becoming increasingly a global marketplace. We did not want North Carolinians to not have the tools available to them. At this point, however, it's time for adoption, because, we want these things to be used first and foremost by the citizens of North Carolina, for the citizens of North Carolina, so that the folks who are doing business in North Carolina can, again, provide these tools and services that's going to make things better for our citizens, opposed to being in the back of the line and having folks sweeping from, other states or what have you, providing less than, stellar service for our citizens. And beyond that, just kind of leaving North Carolina kind of behind. We need to be on the forefront of this so that we can reap the benefits of this and stay in the driver's seat.
I agree. I agree 100%. Couple questions I might be able to answer. So somebody asked, what does an e-closing look like? What's the flow? To be honest with y'all, mine, and it kind of depends on the attorney and the software they're using. We use a software called Doc Magic. It looked very similar to what you see right now, a Zoom room. We had the attorney in there. You had the camera. They would share their screen and go through the paperwork. They could mark it up, highlight whatever they need to. We would ask any questions. And then they're like, all right, Mark, are you ready to sign? Yes, I am. And then I had control of the screen. He pressed a button and you could see my little mouse turned into like a pen and I could sign right there. And then he gave my wife control of the screen and she could sign. And then you click a couple buttons. I mean, it's very similar. Think of DocuSign and Zoom kind of coming together in a platform. That was my experience with it. And how the flow and everything worked there. Somebody else asked a question, does the buyer and the seller have to both do the e-closing? No. In my situation, the seller did the traditional closing. They went to the attorney and signed their documents there. I did the e-closing. So the seller can still do however they want to do it and everything. Somebody else mentioned, and this is a really good question about a power of attorney. Could a power of attorney sign paperwork on a notary? I guess that comes into kind of the legal terms on it, but I'm hoping personally this can get rid of these power of attorneys for real estate closings because there's no reason for me to be the power of attorney when my client who's in Ohio can just log into a room and sign it. I am not a fan of doing power of attorney signings, and that's like the last option that I want to look at doing. Any thoughts on that, Ozzy? Hopefully get away from that.
Yeah, I think you're right. One of the benefits of the remote process is that it does not matter. You don't have to be there to go into somebody's office. You can open up your laptop or maybe even your telephone if you can read if it's large enough screen and execute things that way. So that would be one of the primary benefits of utilizing this technology in those situations.
Yeah. And even I said an example of if you're representing a buyer and the buyer can't get off work, now me as the realtor could go meet with them, and as long as I have an internet and my laptop, they might be able to step out, do the signing right there. I always give the example. My wife's a pre-K teacher, and sometimes it's hard for her to get away during the day. We could basically do the closing in the parking lot if she can come out and get online. So it really opens up the convenience side of everything. We've got about 5 minutes left. I hope I have answered most of the questions that are in here. A couple people had asked if the client is in another country. You mentioned earlier if they have to be at an embassy or a consulate office. Talk on that for just a second.
Yeah, we really fought hard against having the REN transactions be able to be done anywhere in the world, because it just creates so much of an issue as it relates to jurisdiction. And and what happens if this person's in a foreign country. It could be a sovereignty issue for the notary or the person who's conducting the business. And so it's limited to the United States and folks who might be on military installations or consulates or embassies. So an individual who is, in some other country, not or outside of the U.S. embassy or consulate, they would have to find another means or another state's notaries, because some other states do allow that. But we think that that's a really, really tricky and dangerous area to be in.
But it's a huge benefit for our military families and all that could do e-closings from the military base, possibly. Correct?
Yeah, absolutely. They would be able to do this as though they were right next door. Absolutely.
Awesome. That could be good. So if you can, let everybody know about the e-mortgage e-closing conference that we have once a year. And we actually had a phone call about this. There's going to be some information coming out about our e-conference in August, and we're going to have some realtors there this year. You want to speak on that real quick?
Yeah, sure. We and everybody mark your calendars for I believe it's August 26th. mm-hmm. 27th. We're going to convene in Charlotte, and this will be our 5th annual electronic mortgage closing conference. And as I mentioned earlier, we really do believe and see that realtors are the key in terms of making this work in North Carolina. And so last year, for the first time, we incorporated Mark's 4-hour CE course into the conference, which was great. And so we're going to do that again, but we're going to go a step further, and we're building more content and more sessions specifically with realtors in mind, so that you'll have the most updated and latest information regarding the practical use of these electronic tools, and how to actually engage them, how your customers will be able to engage them. We'll have attorneys and lenders, and hopefully a great deal of realtors, some with expertise, who will be able to share those experiences. And we're going to talk about more than just the e-closing. Mark is going to lead a couple sessions where we're going to talk about all of the other technology surrounding the industry, how AI is going to impact what it is that we do. The use of electronic signatures. We'll have updates on the remote electronic notarization in terms of where we are at that point in time. So again, we've been working really hard with Mark and Mandy Lowe over at the North Carolina Realtors to make sure that we have some important and engaging information that's going to be of great value to realtors. So be on the lookout for more information related to that. We're really looking forward to that.
Yeah. So y'all are the first to hear about this. And the dates are going to be, the check-in is Monday, August the 26th, full day of the 27th. The 27th, we're going to be looking at doing a brand new CE course. It's in the approval process now, but that's going to include some AI, eClosings and all, and it runs through August the 28th, and it's going to be downtown Charlotte. So looking forward to that event. It's going to be a lot of fun. So Ozzy, thank you so much. I know how busy you are. Thank you for taking the time to get us updated on eClosings. It's very, very exciting. And I hope realtors can see the advantage and the excitement that can be coming from this. So thank you so much for your time.
And Mark, thank you so much for having me. And if anybody has any specific questions about notary or e-notary, you can reach me at osstallworth@sosnc.gov. I'll try to type that in the Q&A, but it's osstallworth@sosnc.gov.
Awesome. Thanks, everybody. Thanks for attending. Hope to see y'all in person soon. Bye, everybody.